The great hall of the Keltharian Academy buzzed with quiet conversation as hundreds of scaled academics took their seats. Their crystalline eyes gleamed in the soft blue light that filtered through the dome above. Today was special. Today, Dr. Zareth Vex would present her latest research on primitive species and their strange beliefs. Zareth stood at the center of the hall, her silver scales catching the light as she moved. She was tall even by Keltharian standards, with eyes that shifted from pale blue to amber depending on her mood. Right now they glowed with confidence. She had spent months preparing this lecture, and she knew it would cement her reputation as the galaxy's leading expert on debunking alien mythologies. The murmur of voices died down as she activated the iron holographic projector. Images of various alien species appeared in the air above the audience. Some looked almost familiar, others were bizarre beyond imagination. But the final image made several academics chuckle softly. It showed a human, one of the newest species to join galactic civilization. "Fellow scholars," Zareth began, her voice carrying easily through the hall, "for 300 years we have studied the mythologies of primitive species. We have learned that when faced with harsh realities, lesser civilizations create stories to comfort themselves. Today, I present the most fascinating case yet discovered." She gestured to the human image, which rotated slowly in the air. The creature looked fragile compared to most galactic species. No natural armor, no enhanced strength, no psychic abilities, just soft skin and determined eyes. "Humanity," she continued, "a species so young they have barely left their home system. Yet their mythology is perhaps the richest we have ever encountered. They tell stories of individuals who can achieve the impossible through something they call determination." The audience leaned forward with interest. Keltharians prided themselves on logic and reason. The idea that any species would believe willpower could overcome physical laws was both amusing and intriguing. Zareth activated another set of images. These showed human warriors in various poses, some carrying weapons, others standing defiantly against overwhelming odds. "Observe their heroes," she said. "They speak of soldiers who refuse to die even when mortally wounded. They tell tales of individuals who fight through impossible pain to save their companions. Most remarkably, they insist these stories are not fiction, but historical fact." A ripple of laughter went through the audience. Elder Thekmor, sitting in the front row, did not laugh. His ancient eyes studied the images with unusual intensity. He had met humans before, during the first contact negotiations, and something about them had troubled him ever since. "The human concept of heroism is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of biology," Zareth explained. "They believe their species possesses some unique quality that allows them to transcend normal limitations. They call it human spirit, or the human condition, or simply being human. In reality, it is nothing more than evolutionary psychology creating comfort narratives." She brought up a new image, this one showing a human soldier in combat gear. The figure looked ordinary, even unremarkable by galactic standards, yet the humans had built entire legends around this one individual. "This brings us to their most recent mythological creation," Zareth said, her eyes shifting to bright amber with amusement. "Jake Morrison, a human soldier who supposedly achieved impossible feats of endurance and courage. According to human sources, he fought through an entire enemy battalion to reach his trapped squad members." The image showed Morrison in what humans called battle dress uniform. He looked young, maybe 30 human years, with short brown hair and intense green eyes. Nothing about him suggested supernatural abilities. The humans claim Morrison held a defensive position alone for 18 hours against overwhelming odds. Zareth continued. "They say he was wounded multiple times but refused medical treatment until his team was safe. Most fascinating of all, they insist he vanished during the final assault and is still alive somewhere, continuing to fight." More laughter from the audience. The idea that any being could survive such punishment was clearly absurd. "This Morrison figure has become a rallying point for human morale," Zareth explained. "Soldiers tell his story before dangerous missions, Civilians invoke his name when facing hardships. He represents their belief that humans can overcome any obstacle through sheer refusal to give up. She paused, letting the absurdity sink in. Of course, we know this is impossible. No species can transcend biological limitations through willpower, alone. The Morrison legend is simply how humans process the reality that their soldiers sometimes die in meaningless conflicts. Elder Thekmore shifted in his seat. He remembered the human negotiators during first contact, how they had spoken of their fallen comrades. There had been something in their voices, a conviction that went beyond simple grief. They truly believed their friends were somehow still fighting, still making a difference. What makes human mythology particularly interesting, Zareth continued, is how detailed and consistent it remains across their entire species. Every human culture has similar stories of individuals who refuse to accept defeat. They speak of mothers who lifted impossible weights to save their children, of explorers who survived in environments that should have killed them, of leaders who inspired victory from certain defeat. The holographic display showed more images, now. Humans in various situations, all supposedly demonstrating this mythical determination. To Keltharian eyes, they looked like any other species facing adversity with biological survival instincts. The consistency suggests this mythology serves a crucial psychological function, Zareth explained. By believing their species possesses unique capabilities, humans maintain morale in situations where logical analysis would counsel surrender. It is actually quite clever from an evolutionary standpoint. She smiled, her crystalline eyes flashing with academic satisfaction. However, we must not let their conviction fool us into believing their stories. Physics is physics, biology is biology, and no species can overcome fundamental limitations through belief alone. The presentation continued for another hour, with Zareth dissecting various human legends and explaining them in terms of established psychological principles. The audience was thoroughly entertained, appreciating both her scholarship and her. And as the lecture concluded, the applause was thunderous. Several colleagues approached to congratulate her on another brilliant analysis. The Dean of Xenopsychology offered her a prestigious research grant to continue her work. "I have wonderful news," the Dean announced. "The Cultural Exchange Council has approved your application to join the diplomatic mission to human space. You will have unprecedented access to their society, their records, their military personnel. Imagine the research opportunities." Zareth's eyes brightened to pure gold with excitement. Direct access to human sources would allow her to gather material for years of future lectures. She could study their mythology formation process in real time, perhaps even interview some of the people who created these Morrison legends. "When do we depart?" she asked. "Next month," the dean replied. "You will join a joint research expedition to their outer colonies. The humans are eager to share their culture with us, apparently believing we will find their stories inspiring rather than amusing." As the crowd dispersed, Elder Thekmore remained in his seat, still staring at the image of Jake Morrison. Something about the human's eyes bothered him. They held a quality he had seen before, in the gaze of ancient Keltharian warriors who had faced impossible odds and somehow survived. He pulled up his personal files on human behavioral statistics. The data showed anomalies that his colleagues dismissed as measurement errors. Humans did seem to survive trauma at rates that exceeded biological models. They recovered from injuries that should have been fatal. They accomplished tasks that required strength or endurance beyond their physical capabilities. Most disturbing of all, they displayed psychological resilience that made no evolutionary sense. Humans would continue fighting when every logical calculation said they should surrender. They would attempt rescues when success was mathematically impossible. They would sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor or duty. Thekmore had tried to discuss these anomalies with other scholars, but they were too busy laughing at human primitiveness to take the data seriously. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps he was seeing patterns where none existed. But as he looked at Morrison's image one more time, he could not shake the feeling that Zareth was making a fundamental error. She was so focused on debunking human mythology that she might be missing something important. something that could change everything they thought they knew about what was possible in the universe. The Keltharian research vessel Infinite Wisdom drifted through space toward the human outer colonies. Zareth stood at the observation deck, watching the stars slowly shift as they traveled through hyperspace. In 3 days, she would meet humans for the first time. The thought filled her with academic excitement. Her quarters were filled with data tablets containing everything known about human psychology and culture. She had spent weeks studying their behavioral patterns, their social structures, their strange customs. Everything confirmed her theories about primitive mythology serving as a coping mechanism. Captain Veltar approached her at the viewing port. His deep blue scales marked him as a military officer rather than a scientist. "Dr. Vex," he said formally, "we will drop out of hyperspace in 6 hours. The human fleet is already waiting at the rendezvous point." Zareth nodded, her crystalline eyes shifting to pale green with anticipation. "Have you had contact with humans before, Captain?" "Once during the initial diplomatic meetings," Veltar replied. "Strange creatures. They seem to form emotional attachments very quickly. During negotiations, they kept mentioning absent colleagues as if these individuals were still present and contributing to the discussions. Typical behavior for a species that uses mythology to process loss," Zareth observed. "They cannot accept that death is final, so they create elaborate fantasies about continued existence or influence." The captain made a sound that might have been agreement, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty. "Perhaps. Though I must admit their military efficiency impressed our observers. They achieved tactical successes that our computer models said were impossible." Zareth waved dismissively. "Computer models cannot account for reckless behavior that appears successful due to random chance. Humans probably take dangerous risks that occasionally pay off, then attribute success to skill rather than luck." 6 hours later, the Infinite Wisdom dropped out of hyperspace near a small space station called Deep Space 7. Zareth pressed against the viewing port to get her first look at human ships. They were smaller than Keltharian vessels, built with sharp angles and heavy armor plating. Everything about them suggested a species that expected conflict. "Functional but primitive," she murmured, making notes on her tablet. "Their technology prioritizes durability over elegance. Classic behavior for a young species that has not yet learned to avoid conflict through superior intellect." The human fleet consisted of 5 ships arranged in a defensive formation around the station. As the Keltharian vessel approached, the human ships moved aside with practiced precision. Their coordination was impressive, Zareth had to admit. Though still far below Keltharian standards, Captain Veltar received clearance to dock, and soon both delegations were meeting in the station's main conference room. Zareth got her first close look at living humans and immediately began cataloging observations. They were even more fragile looking than the holographic images suggested. Soft skin with no natural protection, small frames that looked like they would break easily, and eyes that seemed too large for their faces. Yet they moved with confidence that seemed disproportionate to their obvious physical limitations. The human delegation was led by Commander Lisa Brooks, a woman with short blonde hair and intense blue eyes. She wore a military uniform covered in small badges and ribbons that probably represented various achievements. When she spoke, the other humans listened with obvious respect. "Welcome to Deep Space 7, Commander Brooks said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "We're honored to host this cultural exchange. Learning about each other's societies will strengthen the alliance between our peoples." Zareth studied Brooks carefully. The human showed typical leadership behaviors, but something else caught the xenoarchaeologist's attention. Brooks kept glancing at empty chairs around the conference table, as if expecting someone else to arrive. During the formal introductions, Zareth noticed more interesting behaviors. The humans frequently mentioned colleagues who were not present, referring to their opinions and contributions as if these absent individuals were participating in the discussion. When questioned, they explained that these were people who had died in various conflicts but whose influence continued to guide their decisions. "Fascinating," Zareth whispered to her research assistant. They speak of the dead as if death were merely a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent biological state. The cultural presentations began after the formal ceremonies. The Sadandai Keltharians shared examples of their art, philosophy, and scientific achievements. The humans responded with displays of their own culture, focusing heavily on stories of individual achievement and sacrifice. Commander Brooks took the lead in presenting human culture. She spoke passionately about their history, their values, and their heroes. When she began telling stories of human military actions, her entire demeanor changed. She became more animated, her voice stronger, and her eyes brighter. Humans believe that every individual has the potential for greatness, Brooks explained. We tell stories of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. These stories teach us that we should never give up, no matter how impossible the situation appears. She activated a holographic display showing various human conflicts throughout their history. Images of soldiers, explorers, and civilians appeared in the air above the conference table. Each image was accompanied by a story of someone who had overcome tremendous odds. "This is Captain Sarah Mitchell," Brooks said, indicating an image of a human woman in a pilot's uniform. When her ship was damaged and losing atmosphere, she stayed at the controls for 14 hours to guide her crew to safety. She died from oxygen deprivation 30 minutes before rescue arrived, but her actions saved 47 lives. Zareth made careful notes. The humans clearly used these stories as moral instruction, teaching desired behaviors through emotional manipulation. Primitive but effective for maintaining social cohesion. The presentation continued with more examples. A construction worker who lifted debris that should have required machinery to save trapped colleagues. A medical officer who performed surgery for 18 straight hours during a crisis, refusing rest until every patient was treated. A communications technician who stayed at his post during an enemy attack, calling in coordinates for defensive fire even as his position was being overrun. Each of these people represents something fundamental about humanity, Brooks continued. We don't abandon our responsibilities, we don't leave our people behind, and we don't surrender when others depend on us. Then Brooks brought up an image that made several humans in the room grow quiet. It showed Jake Morrison, the same figure Zareth had discussed in her lecture. But here, surrounded by humans who had actually known him, the reaction was different. Jake represents the best of what we can be, Brooks said, her voice taking on an almost reverent tone. 3 years ago, his unit was trapped behind enemy lines during the Kepler system conflict. Jake fought through impossible odds to reach them, then held a defensive position alone while they evacuated. The other humans nodded solemnly. One of them, a young man with lieutenant's insignia, spoke up. I was there, Commander. Jake took hits that should have killed him, but he kept fighting. When the final assault came, he just vanished. No body, no trace. But somehow we all made it out. Zareth leaned forward with interest. Here was someone who claimed to have witnessed the Morrison incident firsthand. Lieutenant, you say he vanished? What exactly did you observe? The young man looked uncomfortable. It's hard to explain, ma'am. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. But even after he disappeared, the enemy fire seemed to slack off, like something was still fighting them from positions we couldn't see. Clearly trauma-induced hallucination, Zareth murmured to her assistant. Combat stress can cause elaborate false memories, especially when combined with survivor guilt. But Commander Brooks had heard her comment. With respect, Dr. Vex, Jake, Morrison isn't just a story to us. He's family. We don't consider our people dead until we find their bodies, and we never stop looking for those who are missing. Even when logic suggests they cannot possibly be alive? Zareth asked. Brooks smiled, but it was not a happy expression. Especially then. Logic told us the Kepler situation was hopeless. But Jake proved logic wrong. Logic says a lot of things that humans have a habit of ignoring when it matters. The cultural exchange continued for several more hours, but Zareth found herself increasingly fascinated by human attitudes toward death and loss. They seemed genuinely unable to accept that some situations had no solution, that some people could not be saved, that some battles could not be won. During a break in the presentations, she approached Commander Brooks privately, Commander, I am curious about your species' apparent inability to accept loss. From a psychological perspective, this seems maladaptive. Why do humans persist in believing impossible things? Brooks considered the question seriously. Maybe because we've learned that impossible is often just another word for difficult. Our history is full of problems that experts said couldn't be solved, until someone solved them anyway. But surely you recognize that physical laws cannot be overcome through determination alone? The joint fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the void reach, and everyone aboard the ships fell silent. Before them hung something that should not exist. The ancient installation stretched across space like a massive crystal flower, its surfaces shifting between solid matter and translucent energy. Parts of it seemed to exist in normal space, while other sections flickered in and out of reality. Zareth pressed against the observation window of the infinite wisdom, her crystalline eyes cycling through colors as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her instruments gave readings that made no sense. The structure appeared to be partially in their dimension and partially somewhere else entirely. Impossible, she whispered, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Captain Veltar stood beside her, his military training helping him stay calm despite the unprecedented sight. Our sensors detect the installation is at least 4 million years old, he reported. It predates every known civilization in this sector. Commander Brooks's voice came through the communication system from her ship. This is incredible. The structure seems to be using technology that bends space itself. Our physics teams are getting readings they can't explain. Elder Thekmore, who had insisted on joining the expedition despite his advanced age, approached Zareth at the window. His ancient eyes studied the installation with deep concern. I have seen similar descriptions in our oldest archives, he said quietly. Legends speak of builders who could shape reality itself, who fought wars across multiple dimensions. Legends, Zareth repeated automatically, but her tone was uncertain. The structure before them was clearly real, and clearly beyond current understanding. The joint research team assembled aboard a specially equipped shuttle for the initial survey. Zareth found herself working alongside human scientists for the first time. She noticed they approached the unknown installation with excitement rather than proper caution. Aren't you concerned about potential dangers? She asked Dr. Kevin Walsh, a human xenoarchaeologist who seemed remarkably calm given the circumstances. Walsh smiled. Of course there might be dangers, but think about what we might learn. This installation could teach us things that revolutionize our understanding of physics. Consciousness may be reality itself. A logical being would establish safety protocols before proceeding, Zareth observed. Maybe, Walsh replied. But sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve something worthwhile. Besides, we humans have a saying that fortune favors the bold. The shuttle approached the installation carefully, guided by readings from both human and Keltharian sensors. As they drew closer, the structure's impossible nature became even more apparent. Sections of it existed in normal space, while others seemed to occupy dimensions that intersected with theirs at strange angles. The shuttle found a docking port that seemed designed for visitors, though it was built to accommodate species they had never encountered. The airlock cycled normally, suggesting the installation still maintained basic life support systems after millions of years. The survey team entered a vast chamber filled with crystalline matrices that pulsed with soft light. The crystals were arranged in complex patterns that seemed to shift when observed directly. Each matrix was roughly the size of a person and contained swirling energy that suggested some kind of active process. Fascinating, Zareth breathed, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. These appear to be some form of data storage, but operating on principles we don't understand. Elder Thekmore approached one of the matrices carefully. As he drew near, images began to form within the crystal, faces of beings from dozens of different species, all seeming to look outward with expressions of determination and resolve. They're not just storing data, he said with growing alarm. They're storing consciousness. These matrices contain the minds of living beings. Dr. Walsh ran his instruments over several crystals, confirming Thekmore's analysis. The energy patterns match neural activity, but amplified far beyond normal biological levels. It's like each crystal contains a complete personality, preserved but not truly alive. As the team explored deeper into the installation, they discovered chambers filled with thousands of these crystalline matrices. Each one contained what appeared to be a conscious being, trapped in a state between life and death. The scale was staggering. Millions of minds from across the galaxy, all imprisoned within the ancient structure. Commander Brooks studied the readings from her portable scanner. "This isn't just a storage facility," she said grimly. "It's a prison. But why would anyone create something like this?" The answer came when they reached the installation's central chamber. Here, the crystalline matrices were arranged around a massive control system that pulsed with dangerous energy. Warning symbols in dozens of languages flickered on nearby walls, though most were too ancient to translate. Elder Thekmore managed to decipher some of the warnings using his knowledge of archaeological linguistics. "This installation was built to contain something," he announced. "The consciousness stored in the matrices aren't prisoners, they're guards. They volunteered to be imprisoned here to prevent something worse from escaping." Zareth studied the central control system with growing unease. Her instruments detected massive energy buildups that seemed to be contained by the surrounding matrices. What could require millions of volunteers to guard against it? The answer came in the form of images that began appearing in the larger crystals around the control system. Ancient battles between civilizations and entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal reality. Beings that could unmake the basic structure of space and time simply by existing within it. "Interdimensional entities," Dr. Walsh said, his voice tight with fear. "The Guardians fought a war against beings from dimensions where different physical laws apply. When they couldn't destroy the entities, they created this prison to contain them." Commander Brooks examined the control readings with her military training. "The containment systems are failing," she announced. "After millions of years, the prison is breaking down. The energy levels are becoming unstable." Elder Thekmore confirmed her analysis. "If the prison fails completely, it won't just release the Guardians. It will release what they died to contain. Entities that could unravel the basic structure of reality itself." The team worked frantically to understand the control system, but the technology was far beyond anything they had encountered. The installation seemed to require direct mental interface with the central controls, but the energy levels involved would destroy any normal mind that attempted the connection. "There has to be a way to stabilize the system," Commander Brooks insisted, studying the readings with determination. "There's always a way." Zareth found herself admiring the human's refusal to accept defeat, even as logic told her the situation was hopeless. "Commander, the energy requirements alone would kill anyone who tried to operate the controls. Even if we understood the technology, which we don't, no known species has the mental capacity to interface with systems of this complexity." "Maybe no known species," Brooks replied. "But that doesn't mean it's impossible." As if responding to their conversation, several of the crystalline matrices began to pulse more brightly. Images formed within them showing the ancient guardians at work, beings of various species, all united by absolute determination to protect reality itself from forces that would destroy it. One image showed a guardian interfacing with the control system. Their consciousness expanded far beyond normal limits to encompass the entire installation. The process clearly required not just intelligence, but unshakable will and absolute commitment to the task. The Guardians had to possess extraordinary mental discipline, Elder Thekmore observed. The ability to maintain focus despite conditions that would break normal minds. Not just intelligence, but something deeper. Something that transcends normal biological limitations. Zareth stared at the images of ancient guardians, her crystalline eyes shifting through colors as she processed the implications. These beings had achieved something that her scientific training said was impossible. They had used consciousness itself as a tool to reshape reality. "The control system is designed for minds that refuse to accept limitations," she said slowly. "Beings who can maintain absolute determination even when facing impossible odds." Commander Brooks looked up from her scanner. like humans who refuse to give up even when logic says they should. Before Zareth could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the installation. The crystalline matrices were pulsing faster now, their light growing brighter. The containment systems were failing more rapidly than their models predicted. "We have hours, maybe less," Dr. Walsh announced after checking his readings. "If we can't stabilize the prison, the resulting explosion will create an interdimensional rift that could affect entire star systems." The team prepared to evacuate, accepting that some battles could not be won. But as they gathered their equipment, something impossible happened. One of the deepest crystalline matrices began to crack, energy spilling out in patterns that defied the laws of physics. A figure emerged from the failing crystal, moving through energy barriers that should have been impenetrable. A human figure, in damaged military gear, carrying weapons that had not been manufactured in 3 years. Zareth stared at Jake Morrison with her crystalline eyes cycling rapidly through every color in the spectrum. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. 3 years ago, this human had vanished during a military conflict. According to all logical analysis, he should be dead. Yet here he stood, not only alive but somehow changed in ways that defied every scientific principle she knew. Jake looked older than his recorded age, with new scars on his face and hands. His military uniform showed wear patterns that suggested years of combat. Yet the fabric itself seemed to exist partially outside normal space. When he moved, Zareth's instruments detected energy signatures that made no sense according to known physics. "Jake," Commander Brooks said, her voice filled with emotions that Zareth could not fully catalog. "Where have you been? What happened to you?" Jake studied the failing control system while he answered. "I got pulled into the spaces between dimensions during that last firefight on Kepler. Places where time moves differently, where the laws we know don't always apply. I've been fighting entities that exist in multiple realities at once." He gestured toward the crystalline matrices that surrounded them. "These guardians have been holding the line for millions of years, keeping interdimensional predators from invading our reality. But their prison is breaking down, and when it fails completely, it won't just release what they've been guarding. It will tear holes in space-time itself." Dr. Walsh approached cautiously, his scientific instruments registering impossible readings from Jake's presence. "How did you survive in interdimensional space? Human biology isn't designed for environments outside normal reality." "Human biology isn't," Jake agreed. "But human will is something else entirely. When you refuse to give up strongly enough, when you decide that failure isn't an option, sometimes reality bends around that decision instead of breaking you." Zareth found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. Consciousness cannot alter physical laws through determination alone." Jake looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Maybe consciousness is a physical law we just haven't learned to measure yet. Maybe will and determination aren't just chemical reactions in our brains. Maybe they're forces as real as gravity or electromagnetism, just operating on scales we haven't figured out how to detect." Elder Thekmore stepped forward, his ancient features showing a mixture of fear and wonder. "The old legends speak of such beings. Warriors who could walk between worlds, who refused to be limited by the boundaries that constrain others. We thought they were metaphors for spiritual growth. Metaphors can become reality when enough people believe in them," Jake replied. "The Guardians discovered that consciousness itself is a fundamental force in the universe. When focused properly, when backed by absolute commitment, it can reshape the basic structure of existence." The installation's alarms grew louder as more crystalline matrices began to fail. Energy spilled from cracked crystals, creating distortions in space that made the air itself seem to bend and twist. Through the gaps, they could glimpse other dimensions where different physical laws applied. Commander Brooks studied her scanner readings with growing alarm. "Jake, the containment field is collapsing faster than our models predicted. We have maybe 30 minutes before total failure." Jake nodded grimly and approached the central control system. As he drew closer, the energy barriers that had blocked their instruments seemed to part before him like curtains in a breeze. The massive control interface responded to his presence, symbols lighting up in sequences that had been dark for millennia. The control system requires direct neural interface, he explained. But not just any mind can handle the connection. The consciousness has to be strong enough to encompass the entire installation while maintaining absolute focus on the task. Zarath watched her instruments as Jake placed his hands on the control interface. The energy readings spiked beyond her equipment's ability to measure. Whatever was happening to Jake's nervous system should have killed him instantly, yet he remained calm and focused. The process will take time, Jake continued, his voice now echoing strangely, as if it was coming from multiple dimensions at once. In my subjective experience, I'll be interfacing with the system for years. Out here, only minutes will pass, but I'll need absolute quiet to maintain the connection. Through the control interface, images began appearing in the larger crystalline matrices around them. They showed Jake's consciousness expanding beyond his physical body, reaching out to touch every part of the vast installation. His mind interfaced directly with the prison systems, learning their function and beginning the delicate process of repair. Dr. Walsh monitored the energy flows with fascination and terror. His neural activity is off the charts. The patterns don't match anything in our databases for human brain function. It's like he's become something more than human. Or maybe he's become what humans were always capable of being, Elder Thekmore suggested quietly. Perhaps your species possesses latent abilities that only manifest under extreme circumstances. As Jake worked, the images in the matrices showed them glimpses of what he was experiencing. In his expanded consciousness, he could perceive the interdimensional entities that the Guardians had died to contain. They were beings of pure chaos, creatures that existed by unmaking the ordered structure of reality itself. They're not evil, in any way we would understand. Jake's voice came from the control system, though his physical body remained motionless. They're just fundamentally incompatible with ordered existence. When they enter our reality, they don't destroy things, intentionally. They simply exist in a way that makes our kind of existence impossible. The repair process was incredibly complex. Jake had to simultaneously maintain the failing containment fields, rebuild damaged control circuits, and reinforce the psychological barriers that kept the entities dormant. Each task required absolute precision, and any loss of focus could result in catastrophic failure. Commander Brooks watched the energy readings with military discipline, but Zarath could see the worry in her expression. How long can he maintain this level of neural activity? Human brains aren't designed for this kind of stress. Human brains aren't, Elder Thekmore agreed. But Jake Morrison stopped being limited by normal human biology the moment he decided that giving up wasn't an option. Through the matrices, they watched Jake's consciousness battle to hold the prison together. The interdimensional entities seemed to sense his presence and pressed against the weakening barriers with increased intensity. For every system he repaired, they damaged 2 others. For every containment field he strengthened, they found new weaknesses to exploit. The battle was taking place on levels of reality that none of them could fully comprehend. Jake was fighting enemies that existed partially outside space and time, using weapons forged from pure determination and shields built from absolute refusal to accept defeat. He's losing, Dr. Walsh announced after studying the energy patterns. The entities are too strong, and there are too many system failures to repair simultaneously. But even as he spoke, something changed in the matrices around them. Other figures began appearing alongside Jake in the interdimensional battle. The original Guardians, their consciousness freed from the failing crystals, joined the fight to preserve their ancient prison. They're helping him, Zarath breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. The Guardians are sharing their knowledge with him, teaching him how to interface with systems they built millions of years ago. The battle intensified as Jake and the Guardians worked together. They rebuilt containment fields that had been thought permanently damaged, restored control circuits that had failed centuries ago, and reinforced the prison's fundamental structure with techniques that transcended known science. But the effort was costing Jake terribly. Through the matrices, they could see his consciousness being stretched across dimensions, his mental patterns pushed far beyond normal human limits. He was burning himself out to save reality itself. "The repair is working," Commander Brooks announced, reading the stabilizing energy levels. "But Jake's neural activity is approaching critical levels. Much more of this, and the strain will kill him." "Then we need to find another way to help," Elder Thekmore declared. "If consciousness is truly a fundamental force, then perhaps multiple minds working together could share the burden." Zarath stared at the ancient Keltharian in shock. "You're suggesting we interface with alien technology that operates on principles we don't understand, to help a human who is already defying every known law of biology? I'm suggesting we trust in something greater than our limited understanding," Thekmore replied. "Jake Morrison has proven that some things are more important than scientific caution." As the installation's alarms reached a crescendo, they faced a choice that would determine not just their own survival, but the fate of reality itself in their sector of the galaxy. Jake Morrison had stepped out of legend to save them all, but even legends needed help sometimes. The question was whether they had the courage to step beyond their own limitations and join him in the impossible. The ancient installation shook as dimensional barriers continued to weaken. Through the crystalline matrices, they could see Jake Morrison fighting a battle that existed across multiple realities at once. His consciousness was stretched thin, trying to hold together a prison system designed by beings far more advanced than any current civilization. Commander Brooks studied her readings with growing desperation. His neural patterns are becoming unstable. He can't maintain this level of interface much longer without permanent damage to his mind. Elder Thekmore approached the control system, his ancient hands trembling with determination. "Then we must help him. If consciousness is truly a fundamental force, perhaps multiple minds can accomplish what one cannot." Zarath stared at the elderly Keltharian in shock. "You're seriously considering interfacing with technology we don't understand? The energy levels alone could destroy your nervous system in seconds." "Perhaps," Thekmore replied calmly. "But Jake Morrison has proven that some things matter more than personal safety. If we do nothing, the failure of this prison will unravel reality across multiple star systems." Dr. Walsh checked his instruments again. "The containment fields are at 12% and falling. We have maybe 10 minutes before total collapse." Through the matrices, they watched Jake's battle against the interdimensional entities. The ancient guardians were helping him, sharing knowledge accumulated over millions of years. But it wasn't enough. For every system he repaired, 3 more failed elsewhere in the massive installation. Commander Brooks made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just hours earlier. "I'm going to help him." She approached the control interface, placing her hands next to Jake's on the alien controls. "Commander, no," Dr. Walsh shouted. "The energy feedback could kill you." "Maybe," Brooks replied, her voice steady with resolve. "But Jake didn't give up when his squad was trapped. I'm not giving up on him now." The moment her hands touched the controls, energy surged through her nervous system. Pain beyond description flooded her mind as alien technology interfaced directly with her consciousness. But instead of destroying her, something unexpected happened. Her determination to save Jake, combined with her military training and absolute refusal to abandon a teammate, allowed her to maintain contact with the system. "It's working," Thekmore announced, monitoring the energy readings. "Her neural patterns are synchronizing with Jake's. They're sharing the mental load." Zarath watched in amazement as Commander Brooks's consciousness expanded beyond her physical form. Through the matrices, she could see the human woman's mind reaching across dimensions to support Jake in his impossible task. Together, they began making real progress in stabilizing the prison systems. "The humans call it teamwork," Dr. Walsh observed with wonder. "They instinctively understand how to combine their capabilities to achieve goals that would be impossible alone." But even 2 minds weren't enough. The interdimensional entities sensed the increased resistance and pressed their attack with greater intensity. Ancient containment fields that had held for millions of years began to crack under the assault. Elder Thekmore stepped forward without hesitation. "If 2 minds are better than 1, then 3 should be better than 2. He placed his weathered hands on the control interface, adding his consciousness to the neural link. The elderly Kiltharian's vast knowledge of ancient civilizations and his deep understanding of xenoarchaeology proved crucial. He could interpret the Guardian's instructions in ways that Jake and Brooks couldn't, translating alien concepts into approaches that made sense to their different species. Dr. Walsh looked at Zareth with growing urgency. The containment failure is accelerating. They need more help, and we're the only ones left. Zareth stared at the control interface, her crystalline eyes cycling through colors as she faced the most important decision of her life. Everything she had been taught said this was impossible. No species could transcend physical limitations through willpower alone. Consciousness could not be used as a tool to reshape reality. Yet the evidence was right in front of her. Jake Morrison had returned from dimensions that shouldn't exist. 3 beings were successfully interfacing with technology, millions of years beyond their understanding. They were holding together a prison system that protected reality itself. My entire career has been built on proving that such things are impossible, she said quietly. Maybe it's time to build a new career, Dr. Walsh suggested, one based on discovering what's actually possible instead of limiting what others can achieve. Through the matrices, they could see the battle reaching its climax. Jake, Brooks, and Thekmore were working together across dimensional barriers, their combined consciousness wrestling with forces that existed beyond normal space and time. But the strain was enormous. All 3 were approaching the limits of what their minds could endure. Zareth made her choice. She placed her hands on the control interface and opened her consciousness to possibilities she had spent her life denying. The alien technology interfaced with her mind, and suddenly she could perceive reality from perspectives that her scientific training had never imagined. Her analytical skills, her deep knowledge of xenopsychology, and her newfound willingness to accept the impossible made her the perfect addition to their neural link. She could understand both the alien technology and the psychological dynamics of their unusual team. Working together, the 4 minds began to achieve what the original Guardians had thought impossible. They weren't just repairing the prison system. They were improving it, adding new safeguards and strengthening containment fields with techniques that combined the best insights from multiple species and millions of years of accumulated knowledge. The interdimensional entities fought back with desperate fury, but they couldn't overcome the combined determination of beings who refused to accept defeat. Jake's unshakable will, Brooks's military precision, Thekmore's ancient wisdom, and Zareth's analytical brilliance created a force that transcended the sum of its parts. Slowly, the prison system stabilized. Containment fields that had been failing for centuries suddenly strengthened beyond their original specifications. Control circuits that had been damaged by eons of wear began functioning better than when they were first built. The interdimensional entities, faced with a prison stronger than ever before, retreated into the deepest levels of containment. The immediate crisis was over, but the 4 minds linked through the alien interface realized they had accomplished something far more significant than a simple repair. They had discovered that consciousness itself was indeed a fundamental force in the universe. When focused properly, when backed by absolute determination and enhanced by cooperation between different types of intelligence, it could reshape the basic structure of reality. As they carefully withdrew from the neural interface, all 4 experienced a moment of expanded awareness that would change them forever. They had touched something greater than themselves, participated in forces that operated on cosmic scales. Jake was the first to speak as they returned to normal consciousness. The installation is secure now. The Guardians can finally rest. But there are other places like this scattered across the galaxy, other battles being fought in the spaces between dimensions. Commander Brooks nodded, understanding immediately. You're going back out there. You're going to continue the Guardians' work. Someone has to, Jake replied. But I won't be alone anymore. The neural link showed us that consciousness can operate across any distance when properly focused. We'll stay connected, sharing knowledge and supporting each other across the galaxy. Zareth found herself speaking words that would have been impossible for her just days earlier. I want to study this phenomenon properly. Not to debunk it, but to understand how consciousness can be developed and trained to achieve such capabilities. Elder Thekmore smiled with deep satisfaction. The young species are finally ready to learn what the ancients discovered long ago. That the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than logic alone can reveal. As they prepared to leave the installation, Zareth realized that everything she thought she knew about reality had been fundamentally wrong. Human legends weren't primitive mythologies. They were instruction manuals for transcending the limitations that most species accepted as permanent. Jake Morrison hadn't stepped out of myth. He had stepped into a larger understanding of what was truly possible when consciousness refused to accept boundaries. And in helping him save reality itself, the rest of them had learned that they too could become more than evolution had intended. The installation systems hummed with renewed strength as they departed, protected now by safeguards that combined ancient wisdom with modern determination. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, Jake Morrison continued his impossible mission, no longer fighting alone, but supported by minds that had learned to believe in the power of legends made real. Zareth began writing her new research proposal during the journey home. Consciousness as a fundamental force. A new framework for understanding sentient potential. Her colleagues would resist her conclusions, but she had proof that the universe was far more malleable than anyone had dared to imagine.